important. Well then, first there was silence. In the space between heaven and the fall, deep in the unknowable distance, there was a moment when the glorious hum of heaven disappeared and was replaced by a silence so profound that Daniel's soul strained to make out any noise. Then came the feeling of falling, a drop even his wings couldn't prevent, as if the throne had attached moons to them. They hardly beat, and when they did, it made no impact on his fall. Where was he going? There was nothing before him and nothing behind, nothing up and nothing down, only thick darkness and the blurry outline of what was left of Daniel's soul. His imagination took over. It filled his head with something beyond a sound, something inescapable, the haunting words of Lucinda's curse. She will die. She will never pass out of adolescence, will die again and again and again at precisely the moment she remembers your choice. You will never truly be together. Death was coming for Daniel's love. Could he stop it? Would he even recognize it? What did an angel even know of death? Daniel had witnessed it come peacefully to some of the new mortal breed called humans, but death did not concern angels. "Lucinda!" he shouted, and his soul should have warmed at the thought of her, but there was only aching, absence, an abundance of what was not. He should have been able to sense his brethren all around him, but Daniel felt like the last angel in all the worlds. Don't think like that. You'll lose yourself. He tried to hold on, Lucinda, the roll call, Lucinda, the choice. But as he fell, it grew harder to remember. What, for instance, were the last words he'd heard spoken by the throne? The gates of heaven are... He could not remember what came next, could only dimly recall how the great light had flickered and the harshest cold had swept the meadow and the trees in the orchard had fallen into one another, causing waves of furious disturbance that were felt throughout the cosmos. There had been something else, something just before the obliteration of the meadow, something like a twinning. A bold, bright angel had soared up during the roll call and said he was Daniel, come back from the future. There was a sadness in his eyes that looked so old. Had this angel, this version of Daniel's soul, truly suffered? Had Lucinda? A vast rage rose in Daniel. He would find Lucifer, the angel who lived at the dead end of all ideas. Daniel did not fear the traitor who had been the morning star. Wherever, whenever they reached the end of this oblivion, Daniel would take his revenge. But first he would find Lucinda, for without her, nothing mattered. Without her, nothing was possible. The pain of separation coursed through him suddenly, sharp and brutal. He moaned, and his mind clouded over, and suddenly, frighteningly, he couldn't remember why. He tumbled onward, down through denser blackness. He could no longer see or feel or recall how he had ended up here, nowhere, hurtling through nothing, toward where, for how long? His memory sputtered and faded. It was harder to recall those words spoken by the angel in the meadow who had looked so much like... Who had that angel resembled? What had he said that was so important? Daniel didn't know. He didn't know anything anymore. Only that he was tumbling through an endless void. He was filled with an urge to find something. someone, an urge to feel whole again. But there was only darkness inside this darkness, silence drowning out his thoughts, a nothing that was everything. Daniel fell. Thank you. Thanks for coming. I'm really happy to be back here in Ontario. I had a great event here, I guess about 2 years ago for Torment. Corey's wearing the t-shirt as proof. And it was wonderful, and I'm really happy to be back here. I'm really happy to see you guys. I have not always wanted to be a writer, but I have always written. And I think the disconnect there has to do with the fact that I actually didn't know that you could be a writer when I was growing up. I didn't grow up in a community or a family that supported artists. I didn't know any artists. I didn't have any experience with a lifestyle that was any different than having a regular 9-to-5 job. And my parents, as great as they are and as much as they now claim they always supported me, were terrified that I didn't do very well in school, that all I wanted to do was read and write stories, that I didn't really have a focus or a drive. I just knew, or I didn't really know. But my mind just has always worked in a narrative manner. But I never knew that could be anything. I never knew I could do anything interesting with it. So I think I was a fairly terrifying child and teenager to raise if you're parents who are kind of expecting a straight and normal path, which mine were. Luckily, I did have a teacher when I was in 7th and 8th grade who changed my life. And her name was Miss Calloway. She was terrifying. I think she's still terrifying. I actually looked up online recently, because I've been telling the story for a couple of years now, and I realized, people always ask me, like, have you talked to her? Have you reached out to let her know how important she was to you? And I realized, I kept saying, no, I really should do that. Why aren't I doing that? I'm still terrified of her. But I decided to get over that recently, and I emailed her and told her the story that I'm about to tell you. I took an English class. It was like a humanities class in 7th and 8th grade. It was a 2-year class, and it was a 2-hour block. And Miss Calloway was a terror. She was legendary in the school. She had this crazy, long, red, fiery cascade of hair. She drove a little tiny red convertible and wore these pointy red high heel shoes. And you can picture her. She was scary. But she also treated me like an adult. She treated our entire class like an adult. And I had never been treated like an adult by an adult before. And it was a very empowering, strange experience for me. She was tough on us. She didn't cut us any slack. I think her class was the first class that taught me how to write a paper that was actually good, not just finished, if you know what I mean. There's a big difference, apparently. And the first day of the class, I should preface this by saying that I have a brother who's 2 years older than me, and he is kind of your dream model student. He had like 1,600 SATs. He went to a very fancy law school. He did everything right, and he ruined all the teachers for me, because when they got my last name in the class, they were very excited because they knew it was going to be Robbie's little sister, and then, after the first test or report card, it was like, ugh. But so I'd heard about Miss Calloway from my brother, and I knew she was a force to reckon with. And the first day of class, I remember she assigned us a very simple task of keeping a diary for the 2 years that we were going to be in this class. I already kept diaries. I kept 15 diaries already in my life, so this was an easy thing for me. But as I began to kind of fall in love with Miss Calloway, I realized how daunting it is to write something for an audience. It was my first experiment, I guess, in demographics, kind of keeping in mind who your readers are going to be. And so I took my diary so seriously. And everything I wrote I envisioned Miss Calloway reading this. What would Miss Calloway think would be the most interesting thing I could have done today, or worn to school, or said to this person? And so what happened was, I started to lie. I made up these fantastical stories where I was a much more interesting person than I probably actually was. Or I was the kind of interesting that I envisioned she would like. Who knows? But I did, it was sort of my first endeavor in fiction writing. And she told us the first day when she gave us this assignment that if there was anything personal, embarrassing, when you're 13 and 14, everything is personal, embarrassing. But she told us if there is anything you don't want me to read, fold the page over, and I won't read it. And I grew up in a household, still writing a lot of diaries, but knowing that my mom came and foraged through my dresser and read every single page of everything I did all the time as soon as I left the house. So I had no reason to trust that Miss Calloway wouldn't read my fold-over pages. But for some reason I did. And it wasn't a lot of pages, but some of them I did fold over before we turned them into her 2 years later at the end of 8th grade. And I remember going off to summer camp that year. I came home and there was a stack of mail on my bed. My thick self-addressed stamped envelope that I had given to Miss Calloway was there, and she had sent back my journal. And so I had butterflies on my stomach. I remember sitting down to read it, flip through, and find her note at the back. I had very high expectations for this note. I thought it was going to be quite lengthy, maybe as lengthy as my diary had been. And it was incredibly short. It was 2 sentences. And it said, "Lauren, you are an enigma. Keep writing." And I didn't know what enigma meant. I had to look it up. First I went and asked my mom, and she always did not look up from whatever she was stirring on the stove, or whatever classwork she was doing. Look it up. She would never just tell me. So I went and looked it up. And once I realized that I came off as enigmatic, mysterious, to the one person who was the most enigmatic and mysterious in my life, and that I had done that solely by my writing, it felt like I had been given a superpower. And I wanted that experience all the time. And so I did what she told me to do, and I kept writing. And I think about her all the time when I think about why I'm writing, because no one ever told me, keep writing. Probably not until I was in college and taking creative writing classes and actually getting better at it. But I did, all because she told me. And so yeah, when I emailed her recently, I told her this experience. I think she was very moved to hear it, and she wrote me back very quickly, and thank you so much, da-da-da, this made my day. She kept writing me back, "P.S. I just remembered this other thing I wanted to thank you for." And the last thing that she said was, "P.S. P.P.P.P.S. Thank you for trusting that I didn't flip over your folded pages. In 22 years of teaching, I have never flipped over a folded page." So I felt really good about my instincts there to trust her. But she got me on this path, and I continued writing because of her. I never took myself seriously as a writer. It was just something that I liked to do, sort of when it came up at school that you got to write. It was a lucky bonus, kind of something to balance all the horrible math and science and history and everything else homework that I was having to struggle through. When I got into college, I took my first creative writing class, and it was a workshop, and it gave me the workshop bug. I fell in love with it. If you've never taken a writing workshop and you do like to write or you're interested in writing, not everybody likes them, but if you do find, I recommend trying one, because if you do find some merit in it, it can be one of the most exciting experiences. It's a very simple format. You sit in a room, there are 10 to 20 writers in a workshop. Everybody writes a story or maybe a part of a novel or whatever it is. Generally 3 people present their story that week. You pass out Xeroxes the week before, everybody reads it, has a chance to think about it, makes a lot of comments, and then it's basically the you show for a half an hour or an hour, which can feel agonizing, but you're getting input from all of these other writers in your class. And some of them you're going to click with instantly. They become your writing friend and buddy for the rest of your life. When you find that person, you kind of grab onto them and never let them go. I think I have 3 or 4 out of the 20 or 30 workshops I've ever taken. But they're worth holding on to. And some of the comments obviously are not going to feel that great. Somebody might not get your story, or the worst case is they want your story to be something entirely different from what you want it to be. Because there's a difference between saying, I think this is what you're going for, you're not doing it yet, but here's how you might be able to get that extra little bump. And saying, yeah, your story's about this, but it'd be much more awesome if it was about this entirely different thing, which does happen a lot in workshops. But I think for me, just those few moments every once in a while of finding that one person who got it, who was great, whether it was a professor or just somebody else in my class, really spurred me on. And it was around then when I decided, and I saw that it was possible to actually be a writer, to make your life about writing, to try to have that as your job, which was a revelation for me. When I finished college, I drove up to New York and I got a job in publishing because I didn't really know what else to do. I wanted to be as close to the book world as I could, to learn as much as I could about the other side of this industry that I was really interested in breaking into. For me, it was a great few years. I've worked as an editor at a publishing house for about 5 years. And it taught me all sorts of things that I think at this stage have made me so much more relaxed about my role in the publishing wheel. It taught me how long it takes for a book to come out. I think I talked to a lot of readers who were like, hurry up with that next book. But I learned when I had this publishing job that there are all of these steps that need to be checked off before a book can be published. That's why it takes a year and a half sometimes between books. I learned about all the different departments. There's an art department who designs, this cover isn't very beautiful anymore because my toothpaste exploded in my suitcase on my most recent trip. But imagine it without toothpaste. There's the art department who finds these glorious images for the covers. There's obviously, most people know about your editor who helps you completely transform your manuscript a lot of time, who sees things in it that you are not able to see, and helps you, kind of like a good workshop reader, helps you push your first draft that is a mess, but a little gem of mess, into something much more solid and the thing that you want it to be, but don't know how to make it. There's the marketing department who sort of gets authors out to places like this, and the publicity department. There are all these wonderful areas that I never knew existed, that I just thought, stories are great, I want to be involved with stories. And so for me it was really fun to get all of the different sides of the actual business of publishing in my mind. So that when ultimately I left and tried to pursue my own books, I kind of knew what I would be getting myself into, if and when I was lucky enough to get an agent and get published. The Fallen series, obviously, if you guys have read any of the books, you know that there is a strong angel bent to the series. And people ask me a lot, why do you write about angels? I've always loved angels, are you religious? I get a lot of questions about why angels. And the truth is, I kind of came to angels sort of through a back door, because what interests me most, what has always interested me, and I think what will for the next long while, I think, is love. I write love stories, and I think I will always be writing love stories. And what happened when I got the idea for Fallen was I was taking a class about the Bible. I was in graduate school, and it was a class about reading the Bible as literature. And for those of you who are familiar with Genesis, you know that there's a line very early on that talks about angels who looked down from heaven, saw mortal women, found them beautiful, and fell in love with them. There are a couple other references in the Bible that suggest maybe these angels were kicked out of heaven, or maybe angels were kicked out of heaven, maybe Lucifer even was kicked out of heaven for love. And that, to me, sent me on this entire journey. The idea that love could provoke that kind of sacrifice was really shocking to me. And I think, I hear writers say this all the time, and this is how I'm feeling right now with my new book that I'm working on. I just wanted to know more. And so that more that I'm talking about is half research. I had to hit the Bible, I had to read a lot of extra biblical texts and critical sources on the Bible and angelology and that sort of thing. But that's half of it. The other more is your character. Why is your character important in all of this? Who is your character? What's her role? What does she want the most? What is standing between her and the thing that she wants the most? How many more obstacles that aren't standing between her now can you throw in between her and the thing she wants the most? That's how you end up with 4.5 books. But once I knew a little bit more about angelology from doing this research, and once I knew who Lucinda was, why she would be worth an angel falling from heaven for, I was able to start writing. This series has been, I've never written a series before, I've never thought about writing a series before. It's been a joy, a huge pain, the hardest thing I've ever done. I think it got successively with each book harder and harder to write, but also more and more rewarding. I was just talking to Courtney about this in the back, but Rapture was the most challenging for me. It was a beast. I hated it when I was struggling through it, but now it's the book I'm proudest of, and I think those two things really should, for me anyway, go hand in hand. I have to do a lot of struggling in my first and second and third drafts before I get to the point where I have something that's truly satisfying, that feels real and alive and appropriate for the characters, to do the characters justice. Because especially after 4 books, I don't know, maybe it's 2,000 pages or something, I am very much in love and indebted to these characters. So I felt like to say goodbye to them, to give them an ending, was a lot of responsibility that I wasn't prepared for until maybe that 4th draft of Rapture. But now that it's over, I do feel really proud of it, and I hope I always feel that way about my books. I mean, I think you should always sense that you're getting better with each book, that you're getting stronger with each book. I think if I ever stop and look back and think, well, my favorite book I wrote, my greatest achievement was 3 books ago, I'll really have to stop and sort of evaluate what happened since then, why I haven't been feeling that drive. So I hope this is a continuing trend, that I always say, this is the best one. No, this really is the best one. And I hope I get to do that with my new series. I keep talking about my new series, but you probably want to know a little bit about it. I am almost able to tell you, I was just talking to my publisher this week, that they're working on making the announcement. I've just finished a first draft, and as I've said, I mean, my first drafts are embarrassing messes. So in a sense, I still don't feel like I know what this is about. I'm still trying to understand and get that perspective that I need to really feel like I could even say a sentence about this book. But it is a love story, shocker. And it is going to be another series, and it is starring a 17-year-old girl, and that's all I'm going to say. And I think in honor of that mystery, I might turn it over to you guys and take some questions. Does anybody have a question? I bet somebody has a question.
There are no questions. That's impossible.
It is impossible. Once one there we go.
Great.
Now you guys won't stop. Yes.
How did you make up the character of Luce?
The question is, how did I make up the character of Luce? So Luce is the heroine of the series. She was really far and away the hardest character for me to write in the series, mostly because we're very, very different. We do have a couple of things in common, but nothing. It's certainly not an autobiographical book in terms of the narrative, and it's even more than that, less of an autobiographical book in terms of this being my story to tell, my voice. In the beginning, Luce is in a place of real darkness and disparity, and she really can't see her way out of that bleak situation. And when I was writing this book, the first book, Fallen, I was in a completely different place. I had just moved to California, it was sunny, I was finishing my graduate program, I was writing the prologue of Fallen the day I got engaged. I mean, there was a lot of love and happiness in my life, and I knew Luce couldn't be anything like that. But I was fighting what was going on with me emotionally and what I wanted to go on with her emotionally, pretty much on every page in that first book. I did a lot of rewriting to get her emotional pitch right. She really developed, I mean, I think I had to know this one very important thing about her, that if you've read Rapture, you know what it is. But I had to know that that was coming towards her, that there was a revelation she was going to have, and we were going to have, and I was going to have, that made all of this worth it. In order for me to know it was okay for her, us, Daniel, the other characters to kind of struggle for a while with her in the beginning. I got closer to her with each book. I don't think that's really a surprise, but it excited me very much. Especially, I noticed it markedly with Passion, with the third book, which is a book that looks backward through time, kind of leapfrogs across Luce's history of reincarnation. So we see her in, 1920s in Milan. We see her in ancient Egypt. We see her in, where else does she go? She goes in Chichen Itza, in Mexico, around 1000 AD. And so I think getting to see her filtered through all these different backgrounds, removing a lot of the atmospheric effects on her that maybe were in place in some of the contemporary beginnings of the book, led me into her a lot. And also, Passion's a split narrative, so there's Daniel's side of the story, one chapter, Luce's side of the story, one chapter. Having Daniel get a voice, having him speak about Luce so openly, really helped, and his voice came very easily to me in that book. It really helped me to love her even more. It was certainly a slow development with her, but I'm proud of her now, and I'm proud of myself for putting up with her for so long. That was another hand, so yes.
How long was your querying process? When you first finished your manuscript and knew you wanted to find an agent, can you talk a little bit about how that came about, like how you found the right agent? And
Yeah, absolutely.
how you perfected that horrible letter?
It is a horrible experience until it's the moment it stops being horrible, and then it's great. The question is about the querying process, the path to finding an agent, the path to finding a publisher, and all of that. So I should start before Fallen, because my experience was really different from book to book. I finished my first novel when I was 22 or 23. It had been my senior thesis in college, and I took another couple of years to finish it. And I knew it wasn't very good when I finished. I almost didn't finish it. And the best piece of writing advice I've ever gotten is from a woman who I was taking a writing workshop with right around the time I was trying to finish this first novel. And I was talking to her one day after class, and I said, this book is terrible. I've been working on it for, I think it was 6 years at that point, and I hate it. I know it's not going to do anything, but I've got like one chapter left, and I got this great idea for my next book. I'm just going to stop this one and go on to the next one. And she looked at me so seriously, and she said, finish your first book, just so that you know that you can do it. So I didn't really get that, but it was another week or two of writing that last chapter. I finished it. I sent it out to a whole bunch of agents and editors, probably, I don't know, 20, 30. I recently found a box of, I think, 76 rejection letters over the course of my whole the whole period I decided to save rejection letters anyway. Who knows how many more there were. I don't know why I saved them. Maybe so that I could look at you one day and say, I got 76. Don't worry if you've gotten 40. And I got a lot of rejection letters for this first book, and I finally gave up. Because most of the rejection letters were those little form, dear writer, we don't like you, bye. It just feels like there's nothing personal in this letter, just a random backstabbing kind of thing. I do remember I got one good rejection letter, which is, Dear Lauren, I read your, what was my book called? I don't even remember what it was called. I think it was called The Guest Room. I read The Guest Room. I cannot publish it at this time for XYZ reason, but I want you to know that I believe in your writing. I think you should continue doing this. Maybe send me your next book, that kind of thing. And the difference between that little form, Dear Writer, bye, and Dear Lauren, keep going, is huge. And so that kept me going for whatever it took, 6 or 7 more years. One more horrible book that I almost quit in the last chapter because I had this great idea for my next book. But I finished it anyway because Mo had told me to. I did the same thing with my second book. I sent it out to a whole bunch of editors and agents. I poured my heart and soul into it, and it was, so at this point, I had written 2 books that had each taken me 5 or 6 years. At that point, I wrote a very quick, fun, summer, nothing book that was based on Shakespeare's Macbeth that I thought about and had a great time writing, but it wasn't the same experience as these other books that I had written. And I think the difference was because I stole Macbeth, I suddenly had a plot, which I'd never had before. I didn't know anything about plot or how to do it, unless I stole it from Shakespeare. But this book had a plot. This became my first book, The Betrayal of Natalie Hargrove. And out of that book, I found an editor. I didn't even go through the agent order of things, sequence, in that era, in that stage, just because it was easy for me to find a very small publisher, a very small print run. It was sort of a surprising, easy thing after many, many years of struggling and trying. Out of this small book contract that I got for Betrayal, I was able to find my current agent. He's actually someone that I've known for a long time, and he was just becoming an agent as I was finishing up Betrayal. And so he said, I'm a new agent. I said, I'm a new writer, and we kind of hooked up at the beginning. And from there, I had the idea for Fallen. He was very supportive of it, and it was a lot, he handled everything from that point. But it took me a really long time to have anybody open a door or say yes. All you need is one person. That one person for me is my agent now, and he's opened all of these brilliant doors for me and has been a great source of support. It took me a long time to find him, many, many rejection letters. And it didn't even it didn't happen the way I thought it was going to happen. It didn't happen like I went to the mailbox one day and there was a letter saying yes. It was more like, hey, I know your editor, and we know each other. It was that kind of thing. So I guess what I would say the lesson of my story is, what I think is, it makes a lot of sense to me to pursue the normal channels, to go to writers' conferences, to take workshops, to meet other writers, to go to book signings like this, to put yourself in the situation where you will encounter people who are also interested in this, people who are agents or editors at different writing conferences and things around the country. But also let your eyes be open to something kind of sneaking up on you and opening a door anyway. It doesn't always have to go the traditional way you expect it to go. Eventually, for me, the stuff that I wanted to happen with my books didn't happen with the first book, but it happened with Fallen. And I just trust that this kind of weird path would take me back to where I wanted to go. Any more questions?
Yes. On the end of endings at all, and what made you
The question's a great question. The question was, did I have any alternate endings for Rapture? I mean, I certainly did, but not like the way you see an alternate ending in a movie where it's like this other ending that could have been totally awesome. I had more like first, second draft attempts, things I thought might be interesting, things I thought might be good enough, but weren't. And so I really, instead of having to push the same idea further or go deeper, I just had to change course. The first time I wrote the ending of Rapture, it looked entirely different. But I wouldn't feel solid saying it was an alternative ending. It was just not there. My problem a lot of times when, and I would imagine this is a lot of people's problems, but my problem a lot of times when I'm not getting something right in a first draft is I'm shying away from something that's difficult. I'm trying to either protect myself or protect my character from going through something unbelievably hard. And if you can get outside yourself and your limited perspective, if I were talking to a friend who said that, I would say, well, you have to go there. You have to go into that, the darkest place you can imagine, the most painful place you can imagine, and then go further into that than you would ever want to go. So it took me several attempts to get there with Lucinda, to even realize, how do I say this without giving too much away? There's a startling setting shift at the end of Rapture. They leave the place where they are, and we go with Lucinda somewhere entirely else. And that was a place I was not ready to write about for a while. I think for obvious reasons, if you've read it, it's a scary thing to write about. But it was where I had to go with her, and it was a depth that I hadn't anticipated I was going to need to like break into. Yes?
When you were writing about Cam's character, was the purpose when it was like a love triangle between him, Daniel, and Luce, was the point to like spare the pain from experiencing the pain of heartbreak himself, or was it just like an accident kind of thing all
Good question. The question is about Cam's character. Cam is my favorite character in the series, mostly because he's based on my husband. Some of you have heard me say that probably. He's the bad guy. He's sort of the devil for the large part of the series, and yes, I go home to that every night. So Cam's character, aside from Luce, who changed immensely over the course of the series, but that was a change that I had predicted and I wanted to see in her, and I had a clear vision for the shape of her character arc. Cam's character probably changed the most, and I wasn't expecting that. And it had mostly to do with the fact that I fell in love with him because he's my husband. And so the person I thought he was in the first book was not the person he ended up being. He remains very enigmatic to me. Probably more than any other question I've been asked since the last book came out. I get a lot of moaning and whining and crying and what happened to Cam? How could you do that to us and leave Cam just kind of disappearing the way that he does? But it was so obvious to me from the beginning. I didn't know what was going to happen to him, but it was so obvious to me that his ending of all the endings had to be the least wrapped up, because that was the most in keeping and the truest, staying the truest to his character. So I think Cam, it's interesting the language that you used to say, like the point of Cam, or the purpose of this thing that he did. Cam, I think there are other characters in the series who serve a very clear purpose. Gabby is one. She's modeled after the Archangel Gabriel. So she is a role model, she is a guiding force, she's a maternal figure, she's looking after Lucinda all the time, even when we can't really recognize that, even when Luce can't really recognize it, we can recognize it. Cam's character is a lot more organic, unwieldy, he does what he wants, and I just let him do it. He's a character who I would follow anywhere. He goes off the path a lot, and I am thrilled when he does, because I am very happy to kind of go into a dark corner of the woods and see what kind of trouble he'll get into. Any more questions? Yeah, I'll go in back.
So what does your husband think of that character? Like, how does it moralize for what? Does he like it?
Yeah, he actually he loves it. He loves that he's the bad guy. And I think, I mean, one anecdote that I tell about writing, my husband's a writer too, and we are very open. We share a lot of our writing. He reads all of my first drafts before I show them to anyone else and gives me a lot of comments. But I talk to him a lot about my day-to-day experiences and often struggles with my characters. And so if I'm writing about Cam one day, he'll come home, and at the end of the day, I'll tell him, this is what it's like gossiping the way that if you have actual real live coworkers, you would gossip about them, but I'm just gossiping about the imaginary ones. So I will tell him, like Cam did this today, and then he said that, I couldn't believe it. And often, and much to my initial fury, he'll say, like, no, I wouldn't have done it that way, I would have done it this way. And I'm like, baby, you're the inspiration, you're not the character. You don't just get to do whatever you want. He has to do this for the story to make sense this way and this way. And almost always, I realize later he's right. Cam wouldn't do that either. I have to go back and rewrite it. But I think, it's been really fun and funny for me to make Cam this. He's the bad guy, but he's more of he's an oppositional force. He's someone who gets a reaction out of Luce, who makes Luce very uncomfortable a lot of the time, but he pushes her in the right direction. I think because of Cam, we see Luce do things that she wouldn't have done, that she needed to do, that she couldn't have done if he hadn't done X, Y, Z. That was really frustrating or unnerving or whatever. But it's been really fun for me to see the sector of my readership who is drawn to this darker side, because I too obviously am drawn to this darker side. And as much as I value Daniel's character, and as much as it's always been very clear to me that he's the one for Luce, that they will end up together, or at least try to end up together. It's been fun just injecting Cam in here and there, and again, seeing what kind of trouble he can get into. Yes?
I have a question about your writing process. Now, do you sit down every day for a certain amount of time, or do you write when the inspiration flows? Do you also do outlines of your books, or do you just let the story come to you and take it from there?
Sure. The question, it's a writing process question. Do I sit down every day, or do I only sit down to write when I'm inspired? And do I plan an outline, or do I just let the characters go wherever they will? All of it, all of the above. I mean, I would say I'm very boringly diligent about my writing, and I didn't used to be this way. I used to, I mean, when I was working full-time at a different job, I obviously couldn't, it wasn't really feasible to write every day until I realized at some point that it could be feasible, and I tried this experiment where I would try to just write for 20 minutes a day, go into work 20 minutes early and try to write, because someone told me that you could do that. It didn't work for me. I really need, it takes me hours to get into it, and then I have to stay there for a few more hours to actually writing, producing something good, or not good, just producing something at all. And so for me, I used to only sit down, some nights or some weekends when I had the time and I was feeling very inspired. But these days, since I started writing really Betrayal, and once I had a plot, that was missing for me, because without a plot, inspiration has to strike. You have to just know what your characters are going to do that day. Otherwise, you sit down and you know your characters and you love your characters, but what the heck are they going to do in this chapter? You have no idea. So I think having the plot of Macbeth as a backbone was revolutionary for me. It changed the way that I wrote. It made it possible for me to sit down every day and kind of say, I know what's going to happen in this chapter, and I just have to write it. So that leads me to the next part of your question, which is outlining. I do outline now, and I hate outlining, and I have always hated outlining. It was something we assigned in high school, and to me it always just felt like the exact opposite of the creative impulse, to break everything down and know what's going to happen before you get there. I was not interested in that, even with something like a research history paper. So I underestimated the power of an outline. But for me, for someone who is much more of a character-driven writer, who struggles with plot a lot, I realized recently the outline can be your friend. It is your friend. It really helps you just get your bearings and put your feet down. And so my outlines these days, and I would suggest this, for all writers, assuming you have writer buddy, friends, editors that you trust. My outlines go through the entire editorial process. I don't start writing until my agent has seen it, my editor has seen it, my husband has seen it. Everybody's told me all the parts that they think suck, and I've tried to make them better. So it does take me, a couple of months to get out that outline. It's long. It's maybe 15 or 20 pages, detailing this chapter 1. She's going to walk into the store and meet this person, and it will lead to this thing. But then I sit down and for this most recent book that I just finished, and I'm really happy that I just finished. I had an outline, and I stuck to it maybe for the first 3/4 of the book, and I ended up writing the last quarter of the book the way I had envisioned it, but it felt awful every day. It felt wrong. I mean, it was similar to what happened with Rapture. I thought I had a plan, but it just wasn't working anymore, and I didn't know that until I finished it, and went back and looked and thought about who the character was and how she turned out differently than I imagined, and how her friends and family and world had turned out differently than I imagined, and I had to not just rejigger, but really toss the last 7-8 chapters of the book and start over. And that was sort of devastating, because I think when you get to the end of a first draft, you're like, please someone send me on a 2-week trip to Hawaii. But I was like, okay, back at my computer again, I'm really miserable, I've just thrown out 100 pages. But that's what it took for me to get to where the book and the story and the character needed to be. So yes to outlines, but also yes to letting yourself veer away from the outline when you need to. There was a hand right there. Yes.
Okay, so there's like a little rumor, and it says there's going to be a movie. Is that true?
A little rumor. The little rumor about the movie. Yes, it's true. So right around the time Fallen came out, Disney and a production company called Mayhem optioned the film rights. And they have been working on it through a lot of ups and downs and changes at Disney. So it has taken a really long time to get where we are now, which is still just shy of being shot. We have a script, we have producers, we're in the process of getting casting and directors, and I feel like a broken record because I keep saying this, and every time I go to a reading, there are always a lot of exciting movie questions. But there's a lot of stuff happening on the back end that I'm kind of working through and ticking off boxes, and we are making progress at a glacial pace. But yeah, eventually you will see Fallen on the big screen. Yes?
Are you ever afraid that you're going to change your story too much with the movie?
I am afraid of that. I'm going to be a consultant on the movie, so I'll be involved. And I think you hear a lot of different things from writers on movies, and one of my favorite ones is my pal Marcus Zuzak says, when his book is now becoming a movie, says that if the movie's great, everybody loves, everybody's excited, everybody wins, it's a great book, it's a great movie, happy. If the movie sucks, everybody walks out and what's the first thing they say? The book was so much better. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind for writers. That said, especially living where we do, I have an opportunity geographically to be there and to meet with the producers, and I've gotten to spend some time with them and get to know them, and they've responded to a lot of the things that I really respond to about the series, that my readers really respond to about the series. So I think we're in good shape. And I think it will be fun and challenging and bizarre to see how the movie unfolds and to get to weigh in on all of the different steps and little tweaks that go from the adaptation process. Yes?
In Passion, you have the different lives. What made you choose those lives?
The question is, what made me choose the lives that I visited in Passion? It's sort of a mashup of fantasies, I guess. Some of them are places that I have visited myself and had a strong reaction to. Versailles, the chapter where she's at the ball in Versailles. I remember traveling to Versailles when I studied abroad in college and just wishing that there was a ball going on, right? You know, that I could experience what the palace was built for. And so that was sort of an extension of a fantasy to write Ruth into one of those parties. The Mayan chapter in Chichen Itza, when she is presented as a sacrifice. I went to Chichen Itza a few years ago, and I remember just being really amazed by the culture, by the violence and the passion that was really just like at the, you know, like the surface of their culture was so present. I thought it would be really exciting to explore this place and this world and these people, but I was overwhelmed by the idea of writing a whole book about that. So it felt really appropriate to dip into that world and just stay there for 30 pages and then get to go somewhere else. A lot of the places, I complained earlier about like what a bad student I was at history. And I knew this book was going to require a lot of historical research, and that really overwhelmed me and stressed me out, and until I realized that I could do that research through the avenue that felt really natural to me, which was novels, narratives, stories. So there are a lot of settings in the book that are ripped off from, I shouldn't say ripped off, but borrowed, lifted, planted into my book, from someone else's book, from my favorite novels. So the chapter when she's in the hospital in Milan, that's Hemingway, Farewell to Arms. The chapter when she's in Moscow is from a Bulgakov novel that I love called The Master and Margarita. There's the Shakespeare chapter. There are a lot of different literary allusions that that's how I did my historical research. Yeah, some of them are just places like I want to take a vacation, like Tahiti. Yes?
What gave you the idea for like the shadows and like the heavy and government?
The question is, what gave me the idea for the shadows, which become the announcers later in the book, and I think the heavenly government, I think you're talking about like the scale and some of the other angelic presences that we see in Rapture. I think what happened was, with the announcers, for example, those change so much from book to book. There are things that I threw into the series that at the time when I first wrote them, I had no idea what they meant. Not that I didn't know what they meant, but I didn't know what they were going to add up to. I knew in the beginning, Luce is an isolated girl. She feels as if no one understands her. And the shadows were an expression of that. They were something that she dealt with, grappled with, suffered through, no one else could see, no one wanted to hear about. She had to pretend didn't exist. To me, in Fallen, almost until the end of the book, that's all they were. I didn't know what they were capable of. I imagined they would sort themselves out and become something, but especially in the first draft, I had no idea. It wasn't until there's a very small exchange at the end of the book. Luce asks Daniel about what they are. She recognizes that he can see, that he can sense their presence as well, and he gives her the name. He tells her that they're announcers, and he gives her a very brief explanation for what they are. I remember writing that and thinking, like, I'm really gonna have to figure that out before I write Torment. And I had no idea at the time. It took me until Torment to realize that they were these portals to her past. I think that only came about because I knew, again, the question you ask yourself is, what does my character want? What does my character need? What stands in the way of her getting this? So what does my character need? She needs access to her past lives. She needs some way to learn about her history so that she can understand her role in the present and hopefully her future. And that's what the announcers became in that book. In Passion, that need strengthened into she needs to be able to get there, to experience them, to live them. So the announcers became something that would allow her to do that. I'm sure that there are far more brilliant writers who kind of can know all that from the beginning. I'm not one of them. I have to figure it out with each book, with each draft. And maybe my subconscious knows all along. I've learned to trust that a lot. I've experienced that a lot with this most recent book, stuff that I just stuck in there for no apparent reason. Later, in the second draft, I realized, perfect, this has been here all along. It's this beautiful seed for this tree that needed to blossom later. And so I've learned to expect that out of my subconscious and just hope that it happens, and sometimes it does, and sometimes I put things in there that I think I'll figure out later, and I just don't, so I have to take them out. The second part of the question was about the scale. The scale, they're sort of this parole board. They've swept in when there was a vacuum of power, and they're very concerned with getting all of the angels back on the right side, what they think is the right side. There's also a sect of angels called the Outcasts. I think both of these groups sort of arose from questions that I had when I was researching the books initially, when I was doing all that reading on angelology. And I wanted to know, there were answers I was able to find, questions that I had that I could just find, look at a text and say, oh, good, check, this is what I wanted to know. There were other questions I couldn't find the answers to. One of the questions was, what would happen to an angel who fell, who was kicked out of heaven, but immediately repented, decided that they wanted to go back? What would that process look like? How could they go back? What are these characters who would have that waffling experience? What does heaven allow for in that case? And I couldn't find an answer to it, so I wrote the answer myself, and it was kind of an ugly experience, and that's what the Outcast became. The same thing with the scale. I was reading about, there are very, very strangely specific numbers, names, listings of which angels fell, when, why, the names of them and their rankings. And I kept thinking, well, if this powerful angel fell and this powerful angel fell, what about the angels who were sort of ranked just underneath them? They're still left in heaven. What happens to that little vacuum of power that's left by this departed angel? And again, it was another ugly occurrence. The scale are sort of a deplorable force in the book, but they did arise from staying on the right side and just being there when there wasn't a lot of strength left in my heaven, anyway. So those were things that I think, before I did the research, I would never have known how to ask that question. But once I had read enough and kind of felt like I had a grasp of the subject, there were still things I wanted to know and couldn't find. And that's when it became really fun to do some inventing.
Time for one more question. There's one last question before we go into our tiny.
I see it. Yeah.
After studying the Bible and realizing you wanted to write about fallen angels, did you read any books already written specifically fiction on fallen angels?
Did I read any fiction novels about fallen angels after I decided I wanted to write about fallen? After I decided I wanted to write fallen? Not right away. I was more focused on the research that I knew I needed to do. And at first, it felt really, after I had done that research, it felt really difficult once I knew what my mythology was. It felt really difficult. I think I picked up, I can't remember the author's name, but the book is called Angelology. and it's not a YA book, but it was published maybe a year or two after Fallen, and I picked it up. My mother really read it and really loved it, and I read a few pages and I thought that it was really strong writing and exciting characters, but it was hard for me to position my mythology against that mythology because I was reading them at the same time. I'm a huge fan of Philip Pullman and the Golden Compass books, and there are angels in sort of a smaller capacity in that book. And now that I've finished writing this book, I just read Laini Taylor's book, The Daughter of Smoke and Bone, which was amazing. I was bowled over by it. And I think it was different enough from anything my angels are like that it felt a completely different world. It was an angelology that I've really entered into. But I'm trying to think what other angel books I've read. I don't know, but I'm really excited about the next Laini Taylor book, which I think is coming out November. What's it called? The Days of Starlight.
Blood and Starlight.
Blood and Starlight.
Yeah.
Okay, there's some other fans here. Yeah, that's an excellent angel book if you're interested in another angel book.
Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping for how we're going to do the signing. The way that it'll work is we're going to ask everybody who's in this last couple of rows is to push your chairs or pull your chairs so we can form a line that will sign with Lauren and then exit straight out the back just for a little bit of cohesiveness of moving in and moving out as quickly as possible. If you have books from home that you would like to get signed, that is perfectly fine. If you'd like to purchase books, Mrs. Nelson's is in the back and you can go ahead and get them from there. But before we begin our signing, if we could just